You know, sometimes the place you buy to heal is exactly where the worst fight of your life begins. We, my wife, Clara, and I, we weren't just moving to Sycamore Creek Estates for a change of address. We were moving there to rebuild. Our old life, our old house, it was shattered by a loss too big to talk about, leaving this kind of deep, silent crack in our partnership, and this new two-story, nestled in that serene little suburban enclave. It was supposed to be our fresh start, our sanctuary. The real jewel of the place wasn't the granite counters or the bright sunlit rooms, though. It was that huge backyard. Clara, she's a genius with plants, a devoted horticulturist who teaches down at the community college, and she immediately saw that verdant expanse, bordered by those majestic old oaks, blossoming into a lively garden, a place of profound peace. Me, I'm just Dean Keller, a financial consultant, a guy who deals in strategy and patterns, and I saw it as the perfect escape from the relentless demands of my job, a place where the memory of our grief wouldn't ambush us quite so often. We settled in that brisk autumn morning, unloading boxes brimming with our lives, and Clara dove headfirst into that yard, transforming the soil, meticulously planting her flower beds and vegetable gardens. I'd watch her from the kitchen window, her hands stained with earth, her face just radiant with enthusiasm, and honestly, it was the most joy I'd seen her feel in months. It gave me comfort, a real, solid comfort, that this new chapter was working for us both. But like any suburban utopia, ours came with an HOA. Initially, the Sycamore Creek Homeowners Association seemed harmless, just routine reminders in the mailbox about mandatory mail color, beige, naturally, or those monthly inspections of lawn height. Typical suburban red tape, I quipped one evening as Clara frowned over the paperwork. She, however, was less dismissive, noting some of the more unusual stipulations, but we both agreed. We'll adhere to the rules, keep our heads down, avoid any issues. Then, one brisk morning, everything shifted. Clara was out early, trowel in hand, when she heard the low rumble of heavy machinery. She looked toward the perimeter of our backyard and saw a crew of workers unloading supplies from a truck. She figured maybe it was a neighbor, but when one of the men started excavating dirt right next to her newly planted rose bushes, alarm bells went off. "Excuse me," Clara called out, striding toward them, but the workers barely acknowledged her, continuing to drive stakes into the ground. "What are you doing? This is private property." Her voice rose, but the men didn't halt. One finally turned to face her, holding a clipboard, a tall, broad-shouldered guy whose expression was as indifferent as his curt response. "We're installing a safety barrier, ma'am. It's an HOA directive," he stated, as if that clarified everything. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "A safety barrier? Through my backyard? I didn't authorize this." He shrugged, showing zero interest in her objections. "You'll need to discuss this with the HOA. We're merely following orders." By the time I got outside, the workers had already unfurled several feet of heavy, industrial-grade fencing. Imagine this: thick black wire, absolutely adorned with menacing, sharp barbs, stretching right across our immaculate yard, disrupting the entire view. It filled me with this deep, sudden surge of anger. I demanded explanations, but got the same dismissive reply: "Talk to the HOA." I insisted they cease immediately, threatening legal action, and the foreman, giving me a cautious look, finally signaled his crew to pause. "You've got until the end of the day to resolve this," he informed me, before retreating to his truck. "What on earth is happening?" Clara murmured, still unsettled. "They can't just come in and do this, can they?" "They can't," I responded, my jaw clenched. "But we are damn sure going to uncover the reason behind it." We immediately contacted the HOA office, but our efforts were met with vague reassurances and evasive responses. The receptionist, a woman with a brisk, overly cheerful demeanor, told us the fence was part of a new community safety initiative, intended to protect us from unspecified dangers. When I sought further details, she advised me to raise my concerns at the next HOA meeting, scheduled for the following week. "Until then," she added sharply, "I recommend you refrain from interfering with the installation." And then she just hung up. We were left with more uncertainties than answers. We stood in our backyard that evening, staring at that partially constructed fence. The industrial spikes gleamed ominously in the twilight, a stark, vulgar contrast to the gentle greens and yellows of Clara's garden. It wasn't just an eyesore. It was an intrusion, a breach of the peace we had come here to establish. "This doesn't feel right," Clara murmured softly, her arms crossed against the evening chill. "It's not just about safety. There's something more to this." I nodded, my mind racing. I was always good at discerning patterns, connections where others only saw random elements. This situation was inconsistent. Why the secrecy? Why hadn't we been notified? And what kind of safety concern warrants cutting through private property without consent? This felt strategic, not protective. The next morning, Clara made an unsettling discovery that deepened the mystery. Examining the section of the fence nearest her garden, she noticed a small, engraved emblem near the base of one of the posts. It wasn't the HOA's logo. It belonged to a private security firm. She took a photograph and showed it to me. "Does this look like something a neighborhood association would use?" she inquired. I frowned, running the image through a quick search. "No, Clara. This is high-end equipment. Someone is investing significant resources into this." Our peaceful suburban existence had been brutally disrupted, and we were determined to uncover the truth. I didn't hesitate when the crew returned the next morning. I grabbed my phone and started making calls. After an interminable hold, a calm, yet detached voice finally answered. "This is Eleanor Vance, HOA president. How may I assist you?" "Miss Vance, this is Dean Keller, 237 Willowbrook Drive. Can you explain why there's a barbed wire fence being erected across my backyard?" I was informed this is an HOA project, yet I received no prior notification, no explanation, nothing. There was a brief silence. Then Eleanor responded, the tone unnervingly placid. "Mr. Keller, the fence is part of a community safety initiative recently approved by the HOA board. It's intended to address certain concerns within the neighborhood and ensure the safety of all residents." My frustration was evident. What specific concerns? And why does this involve trespassing on private property without permission? This is my backyard, and I did not consent to any of this. "The safety measures," Eleanor maintained, her tone still unnervingly composed, "are part of a broader plan outlined in the last HOA meeting. Notices were sent to all residents." "I didn't receive any notice," I retorted sharply. "Even if I had, I would never have agreed to something like this. What kind of safety issue are we even discussing?" "I'm afraid I cannot disclose the specifics at this time," she replied. "The details of the initiative are confidential." My frustration reached its peak. "Confidential? This isn't a military operation, Miss Vance. It's a suburban neighborhood. You can't simply seize private property under the guise of safety without providing homeowners with clear information." "Mr. Keller," her voice remained disturbingly composed, "the HOA operates under the authority granted by the community charter. All decisions made by the board are legally binding. If you have concerns, I suggest you attend the next HOA meeting where we can discuss this further." Before I could argue, the line went dead. "What did they say?" Clara asked when I returned, standing near the half-installed fence. "Not much," I replied tersely. "Apparently, it's legally binding and confidential." She claims it was approved at a meeting we weren't even informed about. "Legally binding?" Clara repeated, her voice growing louder. "They can't just declare parts of our yard off limits. That's not how property ownership works." Exactly what I told her, I responded, running a hand through my hair. But she wouldn't provide any details. Clara glanced back at the fence, her unease intensifying. "Dean, this doesn't feel right. What safety issue would require barbed wire and industrial fencing? This isn't about keeping deer out of the garden." "I know," I agreed. "And that's what bothers me. If it were simple, they wouldn't be so secretive." Later that day, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. While I was at work, she began researching the HOA and its recent activities. She started with their sparse website, but soon delved deeper, searching for news articles or public records. It wasn't long before she stumbled upon something intriguing. An article from a few months prior mentioned a collaboration between the HOA and a private security firm named Sentinel Protective Services. According to the piece, Sentinel had been contracted to implement advanced security measures, though the specifics weren't disclosed. Clara navigated to the firm's website. Sentinel's services included high-tech surveillance systems, perimeter fencing, and crowd control solutions. The site's promotional material featured stern language about neutralizing threats and maintaining order, which seemed highly inappropriate for Sycamore Creek. "Dean, I think I've found something," she called me, her voice urgent. "The HOA is working with a security company called Sentinel Protective Services. Their website makes them sound like they belong on a military base, not here." "Sentinel Protective Services?" I echoed, skeptical. "What are they doing in a place like this?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "But it explains the fence. This isn't something the HOA would install on their own. Sentinel must be involved." "Great," I muttered, frustration evident. "So now we're dealing with a private security firm on top of the HOA. This just keeps getting worse." That evening, we decided to visit our nearest neighbors, the Harrisons, a retired couple, to inquire if they knew anything. They were courteous but visibly uneasy, frequently glancing over their shoulders as if they were being watched. "We heard about the safety initiative," Mr. Harrison said hesitantly. "The HOA said it was for the good of the community, but we didn't ask many questions." "Why not?" I pressed. Mrs. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't want any trouble, Robert. The last time someone opposed the HOA, their property taxes mysteriously increased, and they received a slew of violations. It's not worth the fight." Clara and I exchanged a concerned look as we walked back to our home. "This isn't just about fences," Clara murmured. "They're using fear to keep everyone in line." I nodded solemnly. "And if that's how they operate, we're going to need a plan. A very good one." The workers returned at dawn, their truck rumbling loudly. I hadn't slept, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. I grabbed my coat and headed for the backyard, Clara close behind. "Hey, I thought I told you yesterday to stop until we figure this out," I shouted, approaching the crew. The foreman, the same burly man with the clipboard, turned around with an exasperated expression. "We have a schedule to maintain," he replied flatly. "Take it up with the HOA." "We did," I snapped, "and they didn't provide any real answers. So until we get this resolved, you're trespassing. This is private property." The foreman shrugged. "Not my decision. I've got orders, and I'm following them." He reached into his pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. "Do you see this? It's a work order, signed and stamped by the HOA. As far as I'm concerned, we're authorized to be here. If you have a problem, take it up with them, but I'm not stopping." I snatched the paper from his hand. It bore the official HOA letterhead and signatures, but it was vague, almost deliberately so. It didn't specify the reason for the fence installation or the safety concerns it purported to address. "This doesn't mean anything," I declared, crumpling the paper. "Get off my property." The foreman remained unfazed, but he signaled his crew to begin packing up their tools. "We'll be back," he called over his shoulder. "This isn't over." "What now?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Now we dig deeper," I stated firmly. "If they think they can intimidate us, they're in for a surprise." I contacted a sharp-minded real estate attorney named Helen Reyes, explaining the situation and sending her photos. Meanwhile, Clara took a more proactive approach. She walked along the length of the fence, documenting every detail, the peculiar emblem, the stakes, the wiring. As she reached the far end, something caught her eye, a small, freshly dug hole near the base of one of the stakes. Inside was a bundle of wires, partially buried. They weren't ordinary wires. They were part of some electronic system. "Dean," she called, her voice edged with urgency. "Look at this. The fence is connected to something." I rushed to her side, my face pale. "A power source? A monitoring system?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "But it's not normal, and it's definitely not just for safety." That evening, Helen returned with her initial findings. "You're right to be suspicious," she affirmed. "That work order is legally shaky at best. The HOA doesn't have explicit authority to modify your property without your consent, even under the guise of a safety initiative. And that logo, Sentinel Protective Services, they're not just a security firm. They specialize in surveillance and perimeter control. This isn't about safety, Dean. It's about control." "Control of what?" I pressed, my voice hardening. "That's what we need to uncover," Helen responded. "But if you're going to challenge this, you need undeniable proof that this fence, and whatever comes next, are illegal." Around midnight, we were abruptly awakened by a loud metallic clanging. I grabbed a flashlight and hurried to the backyard. The noise was emanating from the far side of the fence, where a shadowy figure was crouched near the base, working on something. Hey, Clara shouted, shining the flashlight directly at the figure. The person froze momentarily before darting into the darkness, leaving behind a small toolbox and what appeared to be a set of blueprints. I picked up the blueprints, my hands trembling. They were detailed schematics of the fence, complete with annotations and measurements. In the corner of the page was the Sentinel logo, along with the chilling words, Phase 2 Implementation. What on earth is Phase 2? Clara whispered, her voice quivering. I don't know. I replied, my mind racing. But whatever it is, we're going to stop it. The fence isn't just an intrusion anymore. It's a battleground. We took the blueprints to Helen the next morning. She examined the documents carefully. These are not standard construction plans, she observed. Look here. She pointed to a cluster of symbols. It's a sensor grid. These are motion detectors, designed to feed data into a centralized system, surveillance. Why would a neighborhood HOA need surveillance like this? Who are they watching? Clara demanded. I don't believe it's solely the HOA, Helen responded, her expression grave. Sentinel Protective Services is driving this, using the HOA as a convenient facade. My suspicion is that someone higher up is using this neighborhood as a testing ground. That evening, we returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. We spent hours meticulously reviewing every document we had, property deeds, HOA bylaws, meeting minutes we managed to find online. The deeper we delved, the more inconsistencies we uncovered. The bylaws made no mention of any authority to install structures on private property without explicit consent. As we worked late, Clara's phone buzzed with a message from one of her colleagues at the university, an environmental specialist. Dean, I recognize the name Sentinel. They've been involved in several questionable projects lately, mostly land acquisitions disguised as security operations. Land acquisitions, I muttered, my jaw tightening. So this is about money. It always is, Clara replied bitterly. We decided to confront Eleanor Vance directly. We arrived at the HOA office unannounced. Eleanor was already waiting, sitting behind a polished wooden table, her expression calm, almost smug. You can start by explaining this, I said, placing the blueprints in front of her. Eleanor glanced at the documents, but did not appear surprised. Where did you obtain these? That's not the point, I snapped. The point is that you're installing a surveillance system in people's backyards and obscuring it with vague claims about community safety. We want answers, and we want them now. Mr. Keller, I understand your concerns, but you are misunderstanding the situation. This project is entirely legal and was approved by the HOA board. We've reviewed the bylaws, Clara interjected. There's nothing in them that grants you the authority to do this. And there's nothing in the meeting minutes about this project being approved. Eleanor's composure faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her poise. Some decisions are made at the board's discretion for the greater good of the community. Not every detail is documented in the minutes. I leaned forward, my voice low and stern. Cut the nonsense, Eleanor. This isn't about safety or the greater good. It's about money. Who's paying you to let Sentinel use this neighborhood as their testing ground? For a brief moment, something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Fear, perhaps, or anger, but she swiftly masked it. Mr. Keller, I suggest you tread carefully. Making baseless accusations could have serious consequences. Are you threatening us? Clara demanded, her voice sharp. Not at all, Eleanor replied smoothly. I'm simply advising you to be mindful of your actions. Now, if there's nothing else, I have other matters to attend to. We left the office shaken but undeterred. That night, my phone buzzed with an email from Helen. Attached was a public record search she had conducted on Sentinel Protective Services, including a contract between Sentinel and a private development company. The company had plans to purchase large areas of land in suburban neighborhoods, using security concerns as a pretext to drive down property values and compel residents to sell. This is it, I said, my voice grim. They're trying to push us out. Clara stared at the document, her fists clenched. Over my dead body. We decided our next step had to be going public. We compiled our evidence into a cohesive narrative, outlining how Sentinel and the HOA were collaborating. We drove to the city council office with a printed dossier. If what you're saying is true, the clerk remarked, flipping through the papers, this isn't just a property dispute. It's a legal and ethical violation. I'll ensure this gets to the appropriate authorities. For the first time in days, we felt a glimmer of hope. But our relief was short-lived. Upon returning home that evening, we found our backyard in disarray. The half-installed fence had been reinforced with additional metal panels, and a large black box had been mounted on one of the posts. It hummed faintly, its purpose unknown but undeniably ominous. More concerning was the group of men standing in our yard, drilling stakes into the ground as if we didn't exist. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my anger surging. One of the men turned to me, his expression blank. "We're authorized to complete the installation. Please stay back. This is my property," I yelled. "You have no right to be here. This is part of a community safety initiative," the man said, his tone menacing. "Any interference will result in consequences." Before I could respond, Clara appeared at my side, holding her phone. "I'm recording this," she declared loudly, her voice steady despite the tension. "You're trespassing on private property. Leave now, or we'll call the police." The men hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. A moment later, they began packing up their equipment. "This isn't over," the man said, before turning and walking away. The next morning, I woke to find a legal notice taped to our front door. It was from the HOA, alleging that we had violated community regulations by obstructing an authorized project. The notice included a fine of $10,000 and a warning that further noncompliance could result in legal action, including foreclosure. "They're trying to bleed us dry," Clara said, her voice trembling with anger. "They're trying to scare us," I corrected her. "But it's not going to work. If anything, this just proves we're getting to them." Helen called that evening. "I have good news and bad news," she said. "The good news is that the City Council is taking your complaint seriously. They're scheduling a hearing to review the HOA's actions. The bad news: the HOA and Sentinel have already hired a high-powered legal team to defend their actions. This is going to get messy." "We're ready for messy," I sighed. The hearing was set for the following week. The battle lines were drawn. On the day of the hearing, the City Council chambers were filled with people, including a surprising number of neighbors, some supportive, others just curious. At the far end of the room, Eleanor Vance sat with two sharply dressed lawyers. Helen took the lead, presenting our case methodically. She outlined the illegal actions taken by the HOA, the unauthorized installation, the fines, the threats, and the surveillance equipment. Photos and videos were displayed on a screen for all to see. "The Bennett's property rights have been blatantly violated," Helen asserted, her voice clear and firm. "The HOA, in partnership with Sentinel Protective Services, has employed fear and intimidation to pursue an agenda that benefits no one but themselves and their corporate backers. This is not about safety. It's about control." Eleanor's lawyers attempted to counter, citing vague clauses in the HOA charter, but they faltered when pressed for specifics about the supposed threats or the purpose of the surveillance equipment. The turning point came when Helen presented that crucial contract, the deal she had uncovered between Sentinel and the private development company, explicitly outlining plans to devalue the area through strategic interventions, a euphemism for the exact tactics they had employed. "This isn't about safety," Helen declared, holding the contract aloft. "This is a calculated scheme to force homeowners out of their properties and sell their land to the highest bidder. And the Kellers aren't the only victims." The room erupted in murmurs. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Her lawyers scrambled to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. When one council member directly asked Eleanor if she had approved the contract, she hesitated, stammering, I was acting in the best interest of the community." The council wasn't convinced. After several hours of deliberation, they announced their decision. The fence and all associated equipment were to be removed immediately. The HOA was fined for violating property rights, and the contract with Sentinel was declared null and void. Furthermore, an investigation was launched into the HOA's practices, with Eleanor Vance temporarily suspended from her position. As the decision was read aloud, a wave of relief washed over Clara and me. We exchanged a glance, our exhaustion momentarily giving way to quiet triumph. In the weeks that followed, the fence was dismantled, the surveillance equipment disappeared, and the black box vanished without explanation. Clara and I worked diligently to restore our backyard, planting new flowers and repairing the damage. Neighbors began to visit, offering apologies for their earlier silence and expressing gratitude for our persistence. A few even joined forces, determined to overhaul the HOA completely, ensuring something like this could never happen again. One crisp afternoon, as we sat on our newly rebuilt deck, sipping coffee and watching the sun set over our yard, we reflected on everything. "We almost lost everything," Clara said softly, breaking the silence. "But we didn't," I replied, taking her hand. "Because we didn't back down." Clara smiled faintly, her gaze sweeping across the yard. "It feels different now, like it's truly ours again." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "It always was, and it always will be." They used fear, bureaucracy, and high-tech corporate power to try and steal our home, all under the guise of community safety. But when do the rules designed to protect a neighborhood turn into weapons of control? And when do you have to stop playing by the rules of the system that's trying to crush you? We stood our ground. But if we hadn't found that blueprint, if we hadn't had Helen, if our neighbors had kept silent, where would we be now? Have you ever seen an HOA or a community group cross the line from management to manipulation? What's the most outrageous rule you've ever had to follow? Tell me your story in the comments below. Hit the like button if you think fighting for your home is always worth it, and subscribe for more deep dives into the real-life fights for property and justice.